Welcome, dear learners. Today I will be discussing about the gradations of biodiversity. In earlier lectures, we have discussed the importance and status of biodiversity. So let's get started. Biodiversity, as we have discussed in the earlier lectures, is the variety of life on Earth, exhibits remarkable variation across space and time rather than being uniformly distributed. This uneven distribution, known as gradations of biodiversity, reflects progressive changes in species richness, genetic composition, and ecosystem types across different scales. Spatial gradation highlights how biodiversity varies from one region to another due to climate, topography, and habitat diversity. Environmental gradients such as altitude, latitude, and temperature further influence the composition and abundance of species. Over evolutionary time, biodiversity has also undergone dynamic transformations shaped by spatial adaptation and extinction processes that together define the planet's living fabric. The gradation of biodiversity refers to systematic variation in the richness, abundance, and composition of living organisms observed across different environmental conditions or geographic regions. It explains how the diversity of species and ecological communities changes gradually with shifts in factors such as climate, altitude, latitude, soil type, and productivity. Biodiversity exhibits gradation across different spatial and ecological scales, reflecting the variation in distribution and richness of life forms. These gradations can be broadly categorized into several types, such as latitudinal gradation, altitudinal gradation, depth gradation, and temporal gradation, and at last is ecological gradation. The latitudinal gradation of biodiversity is the most widely recognized global pattern of species distribution, showing that biodiversity increases progressively from the poles towards the equator. Tropical regions possess the greatest species richness due to their favorable and stable environmental conditions, while polar regions support comparatively fewer species adapted to extreme climates. This variation is attributed to factors such as climatic stability, high primary productivity, and greater evolutionary age of tropical ecosystems, which have remained largely unaffected by glaciations. Accordingly, the structural complexity of tropical habitats like rainforests and coral reefs fosters niche specialization. Examples include the highly diverse Amazon rainforest, Western Ghats, and Eastern Himalayas, in contrast to sparsely populated Arctic tundra. Altitudinal gradation refers to the systematic variation in biodiversity observed along mountain slopes as altitude increases. Generally, species richness declines with the elevation due to decrease in temperature, reduced oxygen levels, and poorer soil fertility at higher altitudes. However, in some mountain ranges, a mid-elevation peak is in diversity occurs where favorable moisture and temperature conditions support maximum species richness. This pattern arises from factors such as temperature decline, productivity, ecological isolation, and endemism at higher elevations. For example, in Himalayas, biodiversity transition from tropical deciduous forests in foothills to alpine meadows at higher altitudes. Similarly, the Western Ghats exhibit gradual shift from tropical lowlands to montane shola forests. Ecologically, moving up a forest mimics moving from equator towards the poles. Depth or aquatic gradation describes how biodiversity in aquatic ecosystems such as oceans, seas, and deep lakes changes with increasing depth. These variations arise primarily from differences in light penetration, temperature, water pressure, and nutrient availability. The euphotic zone, that is from 0 to 200 meters, is the sunlit layer where photosynthesis thrives, supporting diverse life forms like phytoplanktons, corals, and fishes. Below it lies the dysphotic zone, 200 to 1000 meters, which receives limited light and hosts adapted species such as squids and lanternfish. The aphotic zone, more than 1000 meters, is completely dark, cold, and high pressure, inhabited by bioluminescent and detritus feeding organisms. Similarly, in freshwater systems, biodiversity decreases from littoral, that is sunlit and diverse, to lamnitic open water and profundal, deep oxygen-poor zones, reflecting a clear depth-related gradient in biological richness and adaptation. Temporal or evolutionary gradation refers to progressive changes and diversification of life forms over geological time. The fossil record revealed a clear trend of increasing biodiversity, interrupted periodically by mass extinction events that reshape life on Earth. During the Precambrian era, life was dominated by simple microbial organisms. The Paleozoic era witnessed an expansion of marine and early terrestrial species, followed by Mesozoic era known as the Age of Reptiles and Conifers. The Cenozoic era marked the dominance of mammals and flowering plants. This evolutionary gradation has been driven by factors such as evolutionary innovations like photosynthesis and flight, continental drift, isolation leading to speciation, and climate fluctuations that alternately caused extinction and radiation of species. Ecological gradation refers to the variation in biodiversity observed along different ecological or environmental gradients with ecosystems. These gradients arise from changes in factors such as moisture, salinity, soil fertility, and ecological succession. For example, as one moves from wetlands to drylands, species adapted to high moisture are gradually replaced by drought-tolerant organisms. Similarly, salinity gradient from fresh to marine estuaries support a transition from freshwater species to salt-tolerant, that is halophytic communities, as seen in mangroves to upland forest zones. In grassland succession, biodiversity progresses from a pioneer herb to stable shrub communities, while in desert to oasis system, distinct plant and animal assemblages reflect adaptations to contrasting resource availability. Gradations across scales has been categorized by Whitaker into three scales, that is alpha, beta, and gamma diversity. In alpha diversity, diversity is seen within the species or within the habitat of ecosystem, whereas beta diversity is the change in species composition between the habitats, and gamma diversity is a total diversity of large landscape or country or state. The gradation of biodiversity is influenced by multiple interrelated factors. Climatic conditions include temperature, rainfall, and humidity directly affect species survival and productivity. Topography such as altitude, slope, and aspect shapes microclimates and habitats, influencing species distribution. Soil quality and nutrient availability determine the growth and diversity of plant community, which in turn support animal species. Evolutionary history and geographic isolation contribute to speciation and endemism. Habitat complexity and niche diversity allow multiple species to coexist by reducing competition. Finally, human activities like land use change, urbanization, and pollution can alter or reduce biodiversity along natural gradients. Understanding the biodiversity gradation has significant ecological and conservation implications. Recognizing these patterns helps to identify biodiversity hotspots and zones of endemism, which are critical for targeted conservation. Gradation pattern also provide insights for predicting the impacts of climate change, as shifts in temperature and precipitation can alter species distribution along ecological and altitudinal gradients. Conservation efforts can prioritize mid-elevation or transitional zones, which often harbor unique and high biodiversity. Additionally, effective ecosystem management relies on maintaining connectivity across gradients through ecological corridors and buffer zones, ensuring the flow of species, genes, and ecological processes essential for long-term ecosystem stability. Talking about the examples from the India, here in the various regions like Western Ghats, which shows the altitudinal gradation, where in high endemism in mid-elevation of sholas. Himalayas show altitudinal and latitudinal type of gradient. Sundarban show ecological, that is salinity type of gradient. Rajasthan show moisture gradient, and Andaman and Nicobar show latitudinal gradients. To wrap up with, the gradations of biodiversity highlights the structured and dynamic nature of life on Earth, showing that species richness and composition are shaped by environmental gradients, evolutionary processes, and ecological interactions, rather than occurring randomly. Understanding these patterns is crucial for predicting how biodiversity will respond to climate change, as shifts in temperature, precipitation, or habitat conditions can alter species distributions along gradients. It also informs conservation planning, helps to design representative protected areas, and prioritize regions of high endemism or unique diversity. Overall, recognizing biodiversity gradients enhance our understanding of biogeographic principles and the factors governing life's global distribution. For getting the more knowledge about the gradations of biodiversity, here is a list of the books which I recommend for reading. Thank you for watching.